Today I want to talk to you about a new policy that the Irish government is introducing. And the main part of this policy is that they want to promote more remote work. And as part of that, an employee, like for example us, we can go to our employer and we have the right to request to work remotely. And because the change in the policy is now that it's a legal right, that means that the employer can't just go like, nah, I don't like home office or whatever. They have to give an actual legitimate reason, and that reason is something you can challenge with a workplace commission if you believe that reason is unjust. So it does change the power dynamic a bit in who gets to decide where you work. But that is not everything. It's a big deal for a lot of people who've discovered remote working for themselves this year, but there's just so much stuff that this remote working policy can change in all different areas and aspects of life, and that is something I'm super excited about. And I want to tell you why exactly. There are 5 reasons why I'm really excited about this. Hi, I'm Divine, one half of Wine and Rum, and we are an expat couple who've been living in Dublin, Ireland for about 4 years. And on this channel, we talk a lot about the expat lifestyle, living in Dublin. So do make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that, and also make sure to subscribe if you're interested in remote work, because that is what today's video is about. So reason number 1, it definitely will be a good thing for rural areas, and that is also one of the main reasons the policy is being promoted. So you may know that I'm from Austria. I'm from a small village in a rural area, and I know how tough it can be that once you're done with school, it's pretty much like, well, you pack up and move to the city, because where else are you going to go to study? Where else are you going to go to look for jobs? It's like, even if you wanted to stay, there isn't that many options. So having the possibility of working remotely changes everything, because more people get to stay in their hometowns or just choose to live in the countryside versus living in the city. It also means that there'll be more infrastructure put towards those rural areas, because just like in countries like Austria or Ireland, you have always this imbalance that, sure, Dublin has most of the inhabitants, same like with Vienna, so they get most of the resources because that's where most of the people live, and then all the rural areas have to split up the rest, and they're always sort of struggling behind, because how can they change stuff if they don't have the resources and they don't have enough people to be able to request more resources? But if you have more people working remotely, that means there'll be more people living in rural areas. They'll have to improve the infrastructure. The Irish government also lined out how they're gonna improve stuff like broadband and build remote working hubs, so you don't necessarily have to work from home. If you don't want to, you could go to a remote working hub and work from there. And it'll also, even if you're like not interested in remote work at all, you could still benefit from it if you live in a rural area, because with more people moving there, that means smaller businesses have an easier time existing. Like, I know from like my own background in my village, but I've also heard it from villages here that sometimes it's very hard for small businesses like hairdressers or pubs to stay open because there's not enough people to sustain them. But with more people moving to the countryside, and also people who can have full-time jobs now that are equivalent to like what you would get in the city, maybe even like have a sort of Dublin salary while you're living in the countryside, that means there's more income to go around to also support those smaller businesses. The second reason I'm excited about the remote working policy is also the effect it can have in Dublin. Like, we've already seen during the pandemic that more and more people chose to move to the edge of Dublin, like we did, or move into neighboring counties or somewhere else altogether. Like, a lot more people who wanted before to move maybe back home to the village that they were from or the small town they were from, they now went and did it because the job isn't holding them back anymore since they can work remotely. So there is definitely, I think, in the long term going to be a change for Dublin as well. The roads should be less congested, and if you've watched the videos, you know how much that is a problem. And also with housing, like, Dublin has such a chronic deficit of housing, but if there's less people who need to live in Dublin just because they're looking for work, if they can live somewhere else, that could also relieve some of the pressure on the lack of housing in Dublin and hopefully help with the rents. It could also just change the vibe of Dublin a bit overall. Like if it's not just that people move here because they have to, because they want to have a job, it might also change a bit the vibe that you go to the city not because you basically need to go to the office after a really long commute and you're already grumpy. You go to the city because of the experience of it. You want to go meet people, I don't know, watch a play, go to the pub, experience the city rather than because you're forced to. Reason number three I'm excited about the remote working policy is, as the policy document points out, and yes, I went and read the whole 30 pages of the document. Yes, that's something I do my Saturday mornings. Judge me for being a nerd if you want. So one thing it points out is it could also make it easier for certain groups of people who are struggling to have access to the job market to be able to have a job. So people with disabilities or people with caring responsibilities, so like someone caring for an elderly relative or maybe for children, it will make them more able to access the job market because remote work is just more flexible in nature to begin with. The fourth reason I'm also excited about the policy is something that we've already noticed. So we've been working from home since March because currently the COVID guidelines in Ireland are that if you're able to work from home, you basically have to, and we haven't gone down in the framework on a level low enough where that wouldn't be the case. So we've been home since March and we have noticed like a lot of differences on the work-life balance, and that's, I think, something that this policy can help with a lot. So by cutting out the entire commute, because if you think about it, commute alone already adds to the stress for the day, for the work days. Like you already end up stressed by the time you get to the office just because commuting can be very stressful. So you cut out that additional stress, but at the same time you are also gaining more time. That is more time you can spend with your family. You can have more time spending on working out or just doing things that make you feel happier and have a better work-life balance. Like, of course, they pointed out that for some people it also makes it harder to disconnect because they end up working longer than the work hours are, and you find yourself maybe checking the emails on the weekends, or because the laptop is right there and it's tempting to check on things. So there will also be more stuff coming on, like they're calling it a right to disconnect, to like have a sort of more legal framework of how all of this remote work can actually be put into action. So before I tell you my final point about why I'm excited and also kind of the biggest reason why I'm excited about the new policy, let me also address some objections, because I can already hear some people typing in the comments about like, but what about the employers? Isn't this unfair to the employers? And sure, it's a big change and it's up to employers also to come up with new processes, and the government is promising there will be help and like workshops and guidelines with how to do stuff, but it can also be a positive thing for the employers. Like they'll have access to more people that could be suitable for a job. Like you're not restricted to just looking for people in your small city. Maybe you can employ people from all over the country, and also you can retrain those people once you found talented people. Like we've experienced in our workplaces that people who maybe came from the countryside, they came to Dublin to have like their initial jobs, get that career experience, but then like the end goal is they really want to move back to their small town, and with that you can retain those employees and keep your team together. There's also varying studies that try to figure out, is home office or working remotely in a remote working hub more productive? Obviously, all the studies are going to find different results because it's very hard to measure productivity when really productivity often comes down to how well someone's work is structured in the first place and how well they know what they're actually supposed to be doing to push their work forward. And that comes down to a lot more management and things like that. One of the biggest criticisms I've heard about remote working is that this year people have had experiences with home working and it wasn't ideal, or they weren't as productive as they would have been in the office. And I think we really have to differentiate here. And that's actually also something the policy document points out, that no one, I think, was prepared to do remote working this year. Like, I remember how it was for me in March. Like, it was pretty much like, oh, okay, the Taoiseach said everyone who can work from home should work from home, and then everyone just hurriedly tried to find all their cables to the laptops and more or less not ran out of the office, but pretty much tried to leave as quickly as possible before all the public transport would be overfilled with all the people trying to bring home all the stuff from the office. So we definitely were not prepared. And I think it was the same for a lot of people, since my job is largely online and we all work with people from other countries. So it is already remote and online calls and everything. In that sense, it was easier. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who struggled at first with having to do things remotely, had to set up programs, and it was hard because you didn't prepare for it. But the way the policy imagines remote work, that is a whole different world, because if you're doing it intentionally and not because you're forced to do it out of an emergency situation, you have time to set up the processes, make sure you have all the things that you need before you get started. So it's an entirely different experience. And I think we also have to remember that we're living through a pandemic. Like, to be honest, I don't think if people weren't as productive as they could have been this year, they wouldn't have been more productive in the office either, because there are the external circumstances that obviously will worry people and that are distracting. So people will naturally find it harder to be productive, and then in that case, it's not really something to do with remote work, but just the general state of the world. So the final and maybe biggest reason why I'm really excited about this new policy is just the mindset behind it. Like, if you look at the image that Ireland usually gets, it's a bit, say it nicely, nostalgic, kind of like things still being like they were a few decades before. Like, a good example of this is this film trailer for this movie called Wild Mountain Thyme, which is supposed to be set in Ireland in like the modern day, but it makes it look like Ireland is still stuck in the 1950s or something. And I feel like that's generally a lot of the time the image that people maybe have of Ireland, when really the truth is just so different from that. So, like, if you move here, if you talk to people, if you also follow like the different policies that the government implements, like this policy, it's just people are really very forward thinking. They're like embracing technology, innovation, and they're trying to come up with a vision of how it could benefit people in the country, how it could like help people in the rural areas and get more people to move not just to Dublin but help like all of the country. And I just feel it's really exciting that you can have a place where you're proud of your long history, your culture, you can embrace that, but at the same time, you can also be really brave about just envisioning like not like flying cars, but like being really imaginative about what the future could look like and how things could change and could change the way of life. And you kind of you get the best of both worlds of the all the old parts, the history, the culture, but also the new things, the innovative things. And like when it comes to those, I think Ireland is, to be honest, probably one of the leading countries in Europe. Like, it doesn't get the reputation for it unfairly, but Ireland is really innovative in coming up with ways to change things and trying to adapt and just improve your life, make everyone happier. And that's just one of the reasons I love living here and not just working here. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Do let us know in the comments, is remote work something you're interested in doing, or are you already doing it? And make sure to subscribe for more videos about being an expat, Ireland, and living remotely. Working remotely. Living and working remotely, I guess, because it's COVID. So see you next time. Bye!